Acapulco, Mexico. This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I'm here in Acapulco, Mexico, as you can see behind me, and that view is real. I proved it before. And I have coming in from the Great White North, from a place I call Winnipeg, Canada. It's Winnipeg, Canada, Josh Sigurdson, who does the World Alternative Media. He's a young guy, and I met him a year or two ago at an event. I think it was a Libertarian Party of Canada event, and he impressed me with how well he does. He's essentially an alternative media person, very much in the same lines as Dan Dix of Press for Truth, which Josh was just at his studios recently. Luke Radowski of We Are Change, people of that type, people who confront people and actually try to get real information and real news, real media, real independent journalism. So I met him there, and I've been watching him, and he's been putting out tons of great stuff. He's been doing tons of great interviews lately. I saw so many, even had one that I think got carried quite widely. I guess it was one of Bill Clinton's ex-girlfriends or something along those lines. He interviewed her, and that got quite a bit of press coverage. So he's been doing tons of great work. He also has done a lot of anarcho-capitalist type videos, including one talking about anarcho-communism, which was really funny. So I thought it was time to have him on Anarchast. So Josh, good to see you.
It's a pleasure, Jeff, and I just wanted to make one quick correction there. I wish it was Bill Clinton's girlfriend, but unfortunately it was a rape victim. And yeah, she was talking to me about how she got threatened by Hillary Clinton and just abused by the Clintons over the years after she came out. But yeah, that's another story. But yeah, it's been a long few months, I'll tell you this much. I'm a tired man, Jeff.
Yeah, I know you've been pumping out the videos. And of course, when I say Bill Clinton's girlfriend, of course, I mean rape victim. That's generally just assumed. Yeah. I know you've also confronted numerous other people. You've confronted the Bank of Canada governor, the finance minister. You've confronted Justin Little Potato, as they call him in China, Trudeau. You've confronted Conrad Black, many others, Bilderberg people. So you've been doing a ton of great work. So that's why I wanted to have you on, so people are aware of your work, because you're doing so much great work, and I want people to know about it. But before we get started, I got to make sure you're a decent person, a sound person, a morally principled person. How did you become an anarchist?
Oh, it's a long-winded answer, Jeff, but basically when I was about 12 years old, I was reading Marx. I was reading all this socialist garbage that you'd expect from a kid, because that kind of mentality is intrinsic within children, that they want to be pampered, they want to be given things, they don't want to do anything for themselves, they just want everything handed to them. And what I basically went on this kind of journey where I went from talking about how we need the government to control our lives in every way except for war, to now, I kind of over time went through these changes where I kind of went more towards libertarianism. Ron Paul opened up my mind to a whole new world, and G. Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, also really instilled these principles in me, where it is this idea that collectivism isn't the problem. It's not left, it's not right, it's collectivism. So when you have vast collectivism, no matter what size or scope, you're still enslaving a group of people to think the way that you do and be extorted so that you can live the way that you want to live. And that's where I kind of got into this idea that, why do we need democracy? What about free market capitalism? And of course that scares a lot of people. Oh, well, evil rich people. No, that's not how it works. I mean, farmers markets, flea markets, garage sales, those are the only real examples of free market capitalism that we have left. Capitalism hasn't existed in a long time. So imagine for a second that you're able to vote for what you want without infringing on other innocent people, without immorally pushing everyone into this box and telling them you must think this way. No matter whether you're right or you're wrong on certain ideals, you cannot force other people to think that way, because if it was turned around, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't like that. So my idea is that with democracy, you vote for what you want by enforcing your will on a bunch of people. And with capitalism, free market capitalism, you vote for what you want without enforcing things on other people. Your demand counts, and it comes down to the individual. So I've gone on this long journey where I believed libertarianism was a way, and it depends on what your definition of libertarianism is, because of course many libertarians want to push towards anarchy, just like lots of socialists want want to push towards communism. So with libertarianism, I see that there's different flavors. I sympathize with the more nationalist brand, but I don't believe that it's a morally correct way of going about politics, or the lack thereof, where I think people would be much better off without these government monopolies, without the manipulation of the markets, without these central bankers enslaving them with debt, by printing money out of thin air, creating devaluation, debt, and inflation, and then pushing all of these insane ideas like bail-in regimes where they're just cashing out your bank account, all while the government takes hold of that opportunity, because people are enslaved by debt, to also divide and conquer, creating absolute control and servitude to the state, and basically creating a chessboard where we're the pawns and we're being sacrificed for the king and the queen, and the majority of the public is liking that. They say, well, it's for the greater good of the greater number. That scary slogan, the greater good of the greater number. So how do we really define that? Can you honestly say it's for the greater good of the greater number by forcing a gun to someone's head and telling them you have to pay for this because this guy down the street wants it? No, it really isn't. The only way that you can have freedom, real freedom, is individual freedom and not enforcing your will on other people. It seems extremely simple to me. However, the public has been so brainwashed over the years that they've just been indoctrinated to believe that they need to depend on others. And that's why you see these crazy SJWs everywhere. That's why you see these wars looming. You see, just kind of a small, minute issue involved in this is that there are huge upticks in the sales of adult diapers. Now, just think about that for a second. There are so many adults that want to be pampered so badly like children that they just decided, we're going to start wearing diapers because I want to be a child again. Well, you know what? That's not how life works. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be able to speak for yourself and not speak for others, unless those people come to you and they say, I want this to happen. It's just voluntary interaction and exchange of goods and services, and it doesn't get much more simpler than that. But people complicate every issue that comes upon them. So we have this debt enslavement, and they're making all this money off of war, where they're destroying countries overseas, destroying families, killing innocent people, children, 1.2 million, which is a conservative estimate in Iraq alone. And then with that, they bring in a whole bunch of people on the taxpayer's dime and put them throughout our, invisible border country of rules and manipulation and coercion, by putting these people into our locales and then getting us to infight so that they can divide us and conquer us. So they're getting us on all levels. They want to destroy us from within, and they're using our ignorance and our stupidity to accomplish this endgame.
Yeah, absolutely. On the adult diapers one, I'm not sure every person who wears adult diapers is doing it because they want to be pampered. I'm sure there's a fair amount of incontinence and things like that. However, that does bring up an interesting point, and it sort of ties into a lot of the things that you just mentioned, in that a lot of the people who kind of believe in this whole structure, this whole statism and government and all these sort of things, they tend to not take very good care of themselves. They kind of have this feeling like, well, especially there in Canada, and I know you know this very well, with the socialized medical system, which so many Canadians are so proud of, and it's absolutely, they've obviously never seen private medical systems. I actually got my mom out of Canada because it was killing her. It was absolutely killing her, and she's so much happier. She's so much healthier now. I've got her off most of the chemicals they had her on up there. But when I went up there, I was amazed at how many kind of old people, and they're not even that old, we're talking 60s and 70s, that are in these homes, and they just have not taken care of themselves. They've been on all these government and big pharma, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, chemicals, which the doctors, who are the worst drug dealers in the world, the only drug dealers I don't like are doctors, that give them these chemicals, and they end up on tons and tons of chemicals, and they become some of the most sickly people. Up there in Edmonton, where I'm from, I couldn't believe how many people are just rolling around in wheelchairs and they just look like they're dying like completely. But down here in Mexico, for example, where they don't have this sort of idea that, oh, well, the government will take care of us. I never see very, very few old people who are kind of not doing very well. I've seen like 70-year-old, 80-year-olds, they're walking around, they're doing fine. They're totally fine physically.
Yeah.
Whereas in other places, so this whole sort of system that you sort of described there is so nefarious and so evil, and it's so sad, isn't it, that so many people believe in this system that's actually, in fact, in many ways, killing them and impoverishing them.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned is absolutely true, Jeff. I mean, you walk around Canada and you see everyone, just so many people that look like Hillary Clinton walking around decrepit and falling apart. And, it's a really sad state of affairs when you consider where this comes from, because they use people's ignorance to push this agenda. So, for example, they say free healthcare for everybody. But you and I both know this isn't free. What it does is it monopolizes the industry, causing inflation, causing the prices on medicine to go up, which then they meet with more taxpayer money, which also helps just pump money into these big pharma companies that people talk about capitalism. This isn't capitalism. This is corporate fascism. This is corporatism, where they're putting taxpayer money into these companies, and then the medicine just rises up in price, and then intellectual property and IP and patents, these laws, these regulations force these ideas into the hands of just one, so no one can compete. There can't be any competition in the market, so no one can bring out their greater idea or sell it for a cheaper price and compete against the bigger guys. And then on top of that, you see all these people that are like, look, I got free healthcare, while they're waiting 14 hours in a hospital waiting room with like a heart attack or something. And people are like, okay, well, we have 2 doctors on duty today. We'll get to you eventually. And then they get to you, misdiagnose you, send you home. You get more sick. You go back in, and you end up waiting another 14 hours to get in again. It's an absolute disgrace. What they've done is they've conditioned people to believe that this healthcare system is saving them. That, well, what, you don't like your free healthcare? Why don't you move to the States where you have to pay a whole bunch, where government also monopolizes healthcare in a different form to a lesser extent, but there's still, there's a tiny bit of competition in the States, but because there's still so little, that prices are just high. People can't get the care they need. And then you have these politicians like Jack Layton, who was the head of the NDP here in Canada, the New Democratic Party, also known by many here as a communist party. He was, sick with cancer, and he ended up going all the way to Europe to get the care he needed, even though he was like the spokesman of this quote-unquote free healthcare system. And it's an absolute disgrace. Even the politicians that put this forward themselves can't live on this. And I've seen so many people in such bad, terrible shape. What you did for your mother was really commendable, Jeff, bringing her out there, because as you and I know, being from Canada, it's just an absolute joke. They got everyone pulling their heartstrings, got this Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution going on, where people think, well, maybe if I pay a little bit more, it'll work out better this time. Then it gets worse, and they're like, oh, well, it's a capitalist, so let's pump more money into the system where these corporatists get all this money. And it's perpetual. It goes on forever. And it's just using sick people, and it's using disabled people for money, and pulling on people's heartstrings, saying that if you don't like it, you must hate disabled people, you must hate the poor, you must hate, these people that are in need of medical care. Well, I'll tell you what, if there was a free market system, that medicine would be a lot cheaper. There'd be so much more competition, so much more innovation. We'd have a cure for cancer at this point. AIDS wouldn't be around after the government spread it through the populace many years ago. We would have a real competitive system based in the free market, where people give their demand to that which they believe by paying for it with their dollar. What happened to the times where we could exchange something, and that would be a vote for the service that we like, instead of having government extorting us and putting money into these systems that fail, that use us and control us in order to, one, depopulate, two, enslave, and three, just completely cause vast amounts of debt and monopolize these massive corporate forms of bureaucracy, which are just getting high off of our destruction. I mean, it's something that I could go into for a long time, but I'm going on a rant, so I'll send it back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, you brought up the New Democratic Party, and it made me think. It's funny how the socialists keep rebranding their socialism. So the New Democratic Party, it's new. It's a new style socialism. And in the U.S., they have Bernie Sanders with, well, it's not socialism, it's democratic socialism. You never hear anyone rebranding capitalism, because capitalism, if it's ever allowed to happen, and it rarely is, but, you know, the free market, when people individually trade and there's no governments taxing them or regulating them, that is capitalism. So that never needs to be rebranded, because no one ever goes, oh, you remember that time when it was kind of almost capitalism and how we had everything and we were so wealthy and we had such great lives, so we need to rebrand it. But they just constantly rebrand it, and people keep buying into it. And a big part of the reason is because of the media. But luckily, thanks to the internet now, and thanks to people like yourself and Dan Dix and Luke Radowski and Alex Poucher, and I could just go on, Derek Bros and so many others that are putting out real information, and that you actually see the stats in the U.S. It's actually unbelievable. Literally, no one watches CNN anymore.
Nobody.
It's like more people watch me, I think, than CNN in general. Like on average, with all the stuff I do, than CNN.
Absolutely.
But because people are still kind of have this thing. Well, it was on CNN, so it must be kind of somewhat true. They've even done a poll asking if they believe what they see on the TV news is real, and most people say no now. So they're actually catching on to it. So things are changing, which is good. But you still have a lot of people who still haven't quite got it, and they still don't quite understand. And that's why it's so important that guys like yourself and all the stuff we're doing and everyone else, all the stuff we're doing is so important to get out there.
I want to throw in a quick plug there, Jeff, for my friends at Freedom Free for All out on the west coast of Canada that are actually getting this stuff on television. They're televised, and they're talking about free market capitalism. They're talking about anarcho-capitalism. They're talking about the false flags that we're watching. They're talking about the central bank debt enslavement across the globe, these globalists, disgusting, I'm trying to hold my language back here, these terrible collectivist fools that are just trying to enslave us. And I'd like to ask you a question there, Jeff. I mean, can you think of, because you've been to Venezuela, you've been to these places that are so hard hit by this over-the-top collectivist control, these socialist central planners that destroy economies across the globe. You've seen it for yourself, and I'm living in a country that's starting to get there. It's not there yet, but it's starting to get there. I mean, we just sold off all of our gold. But, I mean, I want you to answer this for me, Jeff. Can you think of one single country in the entire world that had free market capitalism where you saw people escaping through barbed wire? Can you think of one single country where that's ever happened?
Yeah, the journalist in news coming out now. I'm being interviewed, but that's cool. We're friends. We always talk like this. So, no, absolutely not. Of course not. If you just look at every single instance of any country that's even gotten close to free market capitalism, and some of them would be places like Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Hong Kong 100 years ago was a fishing village. Now look at that place. It is unbelievable, and the people are doing so well. Not every single person, obviously, but you don't see any homeless people or anything really in Hong Kong. It's very wealthy. Just look at the skyscrapers there. And a place like Singapore. Singapore was even 30 or 40 years ago was literally a fishing village, and now it is unbelievable. If you haven't been there, you just have to see it for yourself. And you hear all these again on the mainstream media and a lot of propaganda come out like, well, Singapore, that's like a police state. You're not even allowed to chew gum. It's like, yeah, they have that rule, but no one cares. Like, no one pays attention to it. Like, really, Singapore is like, they do some things that are kind of stupid sometimes, for sure. They are still a government after all, but it's nowhere near like in the US or Canada. It's very close to free market. Places like Dubai, right in the middle of the desert. There was nothing there. Yeah. Just boom, just allow the market to happen just for just a few years, and boom, everyone's doing well. And that's how the whole world would be. And I know some people, and this is what some people might have in mind, is, well, what if if we had free market capitalism all over the world, everyone would be so rich that everyone would have Lamborghinis, and then the world would be destroyed. It's like,
Good.
no, that wouldn't happen.
That would be a good thing.
First of all, if that's your biggest concern is that everyone's doing really well, then you're kind of a sick person. But if you're looking at it like, well, then everyone's gonna have Lamborghinis and giant mansions, and it'll destroy the world. That won't actually happen, because as people get wealthier, not everybody, of course. There's people like Al Gore, who is not a capitalist at all. He's essentially a communist. He's a globalist. He buys those 100-room houses and stuff because those are really sick, twisted people. And of course, that's the guy who's always telling people, oh, we got to give our money to people. He actually builds a lot of his 100-room houses right on the beach, by the way, while he talks about global warming, which is going to raise the sea levels.
His house looks like William Randolph Hearst's house. It's insane. It's just a mansion, and he's talking about how we need to stop trying to make money and, give in to the state. It's totally absurd. And all these examples that you mentioned there, Jeff, are excellent examples of how, like, what do they combat that with? Well, you want to live in Somalia. Well, wait a second. Somalia isn't an anarchist society. It's ruled by these warlords that were put in place by the United States government. These insane maniacs that are massacring people everywhere. That's not real anarchy. That doesn't go along with the non-aggression principle. That's not voluntary interaction. That's crazy drug lords massacring people that are, funded by the U.S. government. And it brings you to this point where you look at these commies that talk about how you shouldn't be able to make a bunch of money. Well, if you look at a lot of their lives, and I'm painting with a broad brush, which is a form of collectivism, so I apologize ahead of time. However, you look at a lot of these commies, and their whole problem isn't that they can't become successful. It's because they're too lazy to do anything to bring success to themselves as an individual. So they look at everyone else, they're jealous, and they don't think anyone else should be successful because they can. They want equality in the form of basically enslavement to a collective because they can't do well in life, so they think no one else should be able to. And it's this kind of crazy mindset that comes out of these communists and have been for years, and that's how we saw what happened with the Russian Revolution when the Soviets came a marching. It's just this idea that everyone must be equal under governing regulatory control, so that everyone must under this government. The only thing that can really succeed, which it doesn't anyway because of their bad central planning and their destruction and debt, the only one that can succeed is the government. So as long as the government...
Well, Venezuela is a great example of that, isn't it, right? Because Hugo Chavez's daughter is worth $4 billion. No one in Venezuela seems to even bring it up. It's like this form of mind control, this communism, socialism thing. And as we pointed out, that's infected the U.S., it's infected Canada, it's infested almost all the entire West, where you pointed out it's not as bad as Venezuela yet, but it's on the road to it because people have this sort of this bizarre ideas in their head that socialism is good, and that's how we help people, when all the facts and all the evidence shows that the only thing that's ever helped poor people, that's ever helped people who've had major problems, is free markets, is capitalism. It makes the entire society so much more wealthy that they can take care of the few who can't.
But they don't want to look into that evidence. They just see it as, well, forced charity. Well, it's not charity when it's forced. That's extortion and theft. The only way that it's real charity is when people have more money because they've made a bunch more money off of the free market, because there's competition, which means more jobs, which means less debt, which means more capital, which then in turn means more jobs, higher wages, all of this. And then people have more money to spend on charities that don't give 85% to people like Hillary Clinton. So, I mean, a great example of just the moral fiber of what the free market is I don't hate poor people. I love poor people. I make half of minimum wage literally doing what I do. I am insanely poor. I'm sitting on my couch at my home right now, and I don't have a nice studio. And thankfully, a smart individual like yourself, Jeff, has been able to become successful and have that beautiful background. But I mean, it comes down to actually doing things as an individual. And my motto is that humanity is that the only person in the world that you can actually control is yourself. And without that, what's the point? Once you've lost that right to control yourself and not be coerced, then you've lost your very humanity, and you've become enslaved to this collective that you never consented to. So this idea that we're just doing what's good for the greater number is untrue. I don't mind as much that people have their governments as long as I can opt out and as long as I'm not coerced by that. But then it comes down to the fact that a lot of these governments, even if I were to be able to opt out, are then manipulating markets. They're then creating monopolies within the markets and creating higher demand for these massive companies that people blame on capitalism when it's actually the opposite. It's actually government. And we have all these problems. So then that just brings me to the moral issue that we need to end the state. We need to have voluntary interaction and completely end the state. And then you have these anarcho-communists that come in and say, well, the real anarchy is, this original definition. And it's like, have you guys not conceived the idea or been able to comprehend the idea that maybe original definitions are wrong? That maybe the original definition of chemistry, earth, wind, water, and fire, might have changed in the hundreds of years since that definition came upon us? That we have a table of elements now? That we have all of these new technological innovations? So the same goes for anarchy. So yes, I agree. The initial definition of anarchy was this kind of collectivist ideal, kind of more syndicalism. However, we've learned since then. We've found that, wait a second, how can I call for no rulers, but then have a collective enforcing their will on the minority? So how can I say, well, you're not allowed to have voluntary interactions, you're not allowed to start a business, make money, exchange goods for services, and shake another guy's hand and say, yes, I agree to this interaction? Who's going to be enforcing a ruling on that and saying that you can't do that? Well, then we get into the idea that, well, maybe anarcho-communism is just a lazy form of anarchy where they want to be taken care of, but they, they aren't willing to do anything for themselves, so they just have this ideology where they still have a collective, just like government, that enforces their will on other people. That's why anarcho-capitalism seems to be the only way, to me, that we truly have freedom on all levels. And voluntarily deciding to work for a business or be a boss and over your private property and having someone voluntarily working for you is not slavery. Slavery is not voluntary. You cannot have voluntary slavery, and that's something that actually Walter Block, who I disagree with on a lot of things, but Walter Block had a lot of really good points on, is that if you want to voluntarily do things, no one should be able to stop you, even if you're volunteering to do everything for free. So essentially what some people would call a slave. But it's not really slavery if it's voluntary, is it? And then you get into this whole vast ideology, which I feel like most of these communists have never even considered looking into. They just want to walk around with their Cuban cigar in their mouth, being a complete poser, and sitting in their basement eating Cheetos, getting their dick orange.
Capitalist Cheetos.
Yeah, absolutely. And
on their iMac.
Exactly.
The whole word anarcho-communist. I can see how you could be an anarcho-communist, but it'd have to be one particular way. You can't be an anarchist and a communist if you want to enforce communism over a group of people who do not voluntarily want to do that. So therefore, you're not an anarchist if you're a communist and you want to enforce it. The only way I could see someone being an anarcho-communist and be legitimate would be to say, yes, I believe there should be no government, and I personally believe that the best way that my life and the other people's lives around me would work is if we were all communist, but I don't want to force anyone to do that, so if I were able to, I would move to a place with a bunch of other communists and we'd all share everything, and that's fine. Then they would be an anarcho-communist. But most of the so-called anarcho-communists don't believe that.
No, none of them would be able to take care of themselves. Can you imagine these bunch of children?
Well, they died very quickly.
Can you imagine these bunch of children in the middle of the woods, like trying to fend for themselves when they need to be pampered every second? It's hilarious just considering it. And it goes to show that these people can't stand by their convictions. And it's interesting that voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism are the only ideologies on the planet that allow for every other ideology, as long as you don't infringe on others, as long as it's voluntary. You can have your communist society over there. Just leave me the hell out of your disaster, because I want absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. So if someone says they're anarcho-communist, but they say you can't, if we ever have this world where it's anarcho-communist, you can't have your own business. It's like, well, who's going to stop me? Well, the anarcho-communist government. It's like, that's not anarchy. What are you talking about?
It's far from it.
No, yeah, it's very confused, but I think they're mostly dying. I used to, at the start of Anarchast, we're now well over 300 episodes. In the first 50 episodes, there'll always be these ANCOMs on, and they'll always be like, "Oh, you dirty, filthy pigs!" and we'd respond to them, and we'd say, "Well, what do you mean?" They'd be like, "Capitalism's evil." It's like, well, capitalism, as far as we're describing it, is just a voluntary trade between people. How is that evil? And then eventually they just go away because they can't win the argument because they have no argument. They're just wanting to shout at people. And so now I never see them. So I think they're pretty much gone. I hear about them every now and then. The other thing about anarcho-communists, which is hilarious and kind of funny, is that they're so useless, and they don't like. I'm not saying this to be like mean or anything. This is true. Every anarcho-communist I've ever met has never produced anything their entire life, and that's why they hate us people who produce things, because they can't, and they want our stuff. That's essentially what communists want.
Maybe they can accumulate some twigs and stuff to start a fire, but I'd like to see them actually start the fire. And Jeff, I've seen some of these comments on your posts, and it's just amazing. Some of the people saying that they want you to be killed by the Zapatistas. Like, these people are violent, disgusting.
I don't mind the
individuals.
Zapatistas. Yeah, like, so even that, I don't know a ton about the Zapatistas, but apparently they're a group down here in Mexico. I think they're more in the south. And I looked into them a little bit, and they're fairly anarchist from what I can tell, but I looked into it for 5 minutes, so I could be totally wrong.
Yeah,
They seem to believe somewhat in socialism or communism, but they seem to be more like, just leave us alone. They don't want the government around, which I'm totally fine with. But I remember that one person said that, I hope the Zapatistas kill you. I'm like, I've never met a Zapatista, but if I did, I'd probably get along with them quite well, as long as they're not trying to force me to give them my stuff. And just to get back to my kind of joke about why we don't see anarcho-communists around, is because they'd never produce anything, these people that I've met or seen on the internet. And so they don't even, they're not even capable of even putting together like a podcast. There's no like anarcho-communist podcast that I know of, because they're just too busy just like smoking weed or smoking their cigars and sitting in their basement and hating the world to actually do anything. So even from that perspective, they've already lost. They've lost because it actually makes no sense.
No,
but like I pointed out, if there is
Go
an anarcho-communist out there, and I'm sure there is a few, I've heard there are a few, feel free to contact me. If you're a true anarchist who believes there should be no government, everything should be voluntary, but you can call yourself a communist as well, and you think communism is great, but you don't want to force it on anyone, I'd be happy to have you on the show, and we could actually talk about that. I'm pretty sure I can pretty quickly show why communism never works. Like, the entire history of communism is one of complete abject failure if what you care about is that people actually have food to eat and aren't being massively slaughtered. Yeah. Now, what they will come back with sometimes is, well, we've never done it right. It's like, okay, well, it's been done like hundreds of times. Capitalism has never really fully ever been allowed to really happen, but every time we get close to it, wonderful things happen. So but I'd be happy to have on a true person who calls himself an anarchist, who's a true anarchist, who just calls himself a communist as well, because they believe that's the best thing for the economy or whatever it is.
Well, when their whole argument, though, is seizing the means of production, and then they try and quote like Rothbard, and they say, see, I'm killing you with your own argument. Rothbard said that government industry should be handed down to the employees. Yeah, government industry, not private industry, not someone's private small business where they fill people's tires for a living. Rothbard never said, well, that's unruly and that's slavery, so you have to hand that company down to the employees so that they all collectively own it. That's not how it works. When you voluntarily sign up for a job, you voluntarily sign up for a job. It's not enslavement. And in full disclosure, I want to make sure to mention that I know absolutely nothing about the Zapatistas myself, outside of the CNN documentaries with the dramatic music and the over-the-top dramatic narrative. But I know nothing about it. But I wanted to get to something, Jeff, that I find very interesting, because, I mean, there's this argument. How do we bring upon an anarchist free market society without, pulling the rug out from under people. So there's some that say just end the state right now. And then there's others that say let it go over 5 years. So we bring it down from globalism to nationalism to, in Canada's case, provincialism to municipality ism, a lot of isms here, then communityism, not communism, but communityism, and then individualism. And this is a kind of argument that I'm still kind of stuck on myself. I don't know. I don't know how the best way of getting to this anarchist society is. I believe in this is what's the end goal, but here we are today. How are we going to get there? And I wouldn't oppose them just pulling the rug out from everyone and saying we're ending the state today, but I really feel like there is this push where we have some leeway and some opportunity with the more nationalist crowd. Now, I don't like nationalism because it's just a smaller form of collectivism, as G. Edward Griffin puts it. However, we got to see the good in, for example, Brexit, where we're going from globalists to sorry, I cut out there for a second.
Is that a Canadian goose?
It's my father's phone. He left it at home. Anyway, I threw
Does
it
he
away.
have a Canadian goose ringtone? That's what it sounded like.
Yes, we're very, very Canadian over here, Jeff. We have a lot of pride. But it's interesting though, because where do we go from there? Do we accept the fact that we're going from globalism to nationalism with things like Brexit, or from globalism to nationalism with these people like Trump, who, by the way, I'm no fan of. He has absolutely no idea what he's talking about most of the time. He just murmurs on with his garbage. But it gets to this point where we have to wonder what is the best way of accomplishing this end goal. So I'd like to hear what you think, actually. We're two interviewers here, so it's interesting. We're kind of going back and forth here. But I'd like to see what you think about it, because this is somewhere where I'm still stuck. I'm okay with both sides personally. I think it's good to go from globalism to nationalism, and then down to the state, and then down to the municipalities, and then the individual. But I also see a lot of people's problems with it, because how do we know we're not going to be stuck in this paradigm where we go down this ladder and then we just stay at nationalism, and then we just have full force collectivism at a national level forever, until once again, as the pattern goes, it grows into globalism.
Yeah, no, that's the big question. I think a big part of it, though, is just changing people's minds. I think none of this is going to happen through any sort of violence. Even if, like you said, there was a button and someone pressed it and all of a sudden Barack Obama and all those people just disappeared, it'd be like a reverse rapture. They'd all go to hell immediately. Even if that happened, what would happen, because so many people are so brainwashed, is they'd just go and we've got to start another government right away. They're like, well, we don't know what to do without it. I'm going to play the intro, the promo video for the upcoming Anarchapulco conference right now for people to watch, because it actually talks a lot about how we see this happening. So I'm going to play that right now.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to throw that in and then talk. So Pete, throw in the whole video there. So a big part of that video that we're talking about there is, in order to change a system, you can't fight the system. You can't change the system the way it is. What you do is you create a new system that makes the old system obsolete. I think that's a big part of it. So now we're seeing anarcho-capitalists coming out with all kinds of evolutions, not even revolution, evolutions in money and banking, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, people using the blockchain technology now to decentralize everything. And of course, the whole crux of individualism, or of not having a centralized government, is decentralization. Yeah. So the one world government people, they want one government, they want one thing that controls everybody. The best case scenario for human beings as a whole is complete decentralization, and in fact 7 billion governments on Earth instead of one government on Earth. So in that respect, I like a lot of and I think we have to hit it on all approaches. I think that's the only way, and we're not going to be sure which one fully works the best or anything. This is all just experimental, really. But there's many people like Adam Kokesh. He wants to run for president of the U.S. in 2020 under the platform that he's going to close immediately the federal government and give all the power of the government back to the states. So that would go from one government to 50 governments immediately if that were to happen. But of course, he's not going to get elected unless people already believe that should happen. So it's kind of this chicken and egg thing, because if people already believe that should happen, then they pretty quickly will probably begin just dismantling it all themselves. They'll stop paying their taxes. They'll stop, the cop will give them a ticket. They'll call them a criminal. They'll tear up the ticket and just throw it, and they won't pay it. And very quickly, the whole system will start to collapse. So that's one way as well.
And
there's so many different ways to do it, but the big one, the key, is information. So many people are so propagandized through not just years but decades and even centuries because the governments have been in control of the education system, and I use air quotes very heavily for that. As Mark Twain talked about with education, it's not education. I think I butcher all quotes, but something about I started learning after I got out of school. Those things are indoctrination camps, and then the mainstream media, but we already talked about how that's fading. So in many ways, it's already happening, but these things do not happen overnight.
No.
We're talking. However, if you do look back, Josh, at communism, it really was not a big ideology at all over 150 years ago. I don't even know if it was an ideology at that point. It was at the start of the 20th century that it started to catch on a little bit. People like Lenin and Stalin and all these people. And within a very short period of time, it became quite big. Now, I have to admit, like even back then, if I was kind of a stupid person, I didn't know too much, and I heard about communism, I might have thought it might be okay, right? You don't know. Like, okay, this is a system we're going to try. We've never tried this before, where, we share everything, and there's this sort of like overseer thing that makes sure everyone gets everything equally. I might have at the time said, yeah, that sounds okay. Let's give it a try. But now it's been tried, and it does not work with human nature whatsoever. And everyone finds a way around it, and it just turns into a bloodbath.
Well, we've seen thousands over time, thousands of fiat currencies crash. And I mean, we're going on the 1,000th year anniversary of the first fiat money, which my economic analyst at World Alternative Media, John Snyson, he actually just recently bought a press from 1024 in China of the first fiat currency. And of course, there were IOUs before that, but this was the first one that was not redeemable. They created this fiat currency out of thin air and loaned out just insane amounts of this currency while having just a minuscule amount of gold. And then it wasn't long after that there was massive inflation, massive debt. People tried to rush the banks and they didn't have their money. And we've seen that now happen over 1,000 times since. And it just gets to the point where we wonder, how long does it take for us to learn from the same mistakes over and over and over again? Now, central planning has been around for a long time.
A big part of that is the education system, right? Because they don't teach you any of that in school, and so people don't learn from it. But thanks to the internet, we have this information now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to paraphrase, and I mean really paraphrase Henry David Thoreau, because I'm not going to be able to correctly say this quote, but something that I really liked from him was he as many of you guys might know, he refused to pay taxes. He said, that is not my responsibility. And to paraphrase his quote, he said, if the only way to have a real peaceful revolution, a velvet revolution, is if we were to all in one day refuse to pay taxes. And I think that's true. If we all just decided one day we're not going to pay taxes, what's the state going to do? Come down on us with guns? Well, here's the thing. Now they've taken away our defense, so we can no longer fight these people and defend ourselves when they come and try and take us away, which is going to happen eventually because we're going up that scale with every passing day. So what's left? Well, what's left is that we need to stop being so apathetic and sitting on our asses, and we need to get up and do something about it. Every individual matters, and it comes down to that point where you go back to, I think it was the Dalai Lama who said it, which is, if you think that you don't mean anything to this vast world, imagine being alone in a mosquito with a tent. Or, in a tent with a mosquito. If you don't want to be inside a mosquito with a tent, you're going to have a bad time. But no, it's just this idea that these people don't have any say. Well, yes, we do. As long as we keep saying that, though, we aren't going to do anything. We're going to stay apathetic. Nothing's going to happen. So the only way we can accomplish these end goals is by actually doing something. Who would have thought that humanity would have had to work for something? So then we move on to, like you mentioned, Adam, cokehead. Kokesh. And I have huge respect for Adam Kokesh. He was one of my prime inspirations in the beginning. He introduced me to the word voluntarism when he interviewed Ron Paul many years ago. And he is definitely one of my heroes. I disagree with him hugely now, though, over some issues, like Gary Johnson. These people, these aren't the change makers. Like Donald Trump, Gary Johnson, you're not going to fix all of this by just voting for someone else. Let them take care of it for us. What can we do? Let these guys, by voting for these people, let these guys take control and over the collective for us and instill their will on people, which, of course, is not libertarian. And tell people what to do from their angle because it's slightly smaller government. Oh, well, that's a great thing, at face value. But when it comes to the substance, it really isn't. Gary Johnson is for the Federal Reserve, for the TPP, for NAFTA. He was for a carbon tax. He's kind of backtracked on that. He's for all these ridiculous ideas that are far from libertarianism. And I gotta wonder what's going on with these people. There's this divide within libertarianism, this divide within anarchy, between anarchists, to suddenly become a statist, suddenly vote for the lesser of the evils. And maybe Gary Johnson isn't evil. He's kind of a worm, from what I know, but maybe he's not evil, but he's still wrong, and you can't enforce that on the public. And I know, Jeff, you've had quite an experience with Gary Johnson yourself, and when I saw that status about what Gary Johnson did to you, it was just another example among literally dozens from people I know that know Gary Johnson or have met him, of this guy just being a slithering little snake that just wants power and wants to be able to have fame and fortune, and doesn't actually give a damn about libertarian principles or the non-aggression principle at all.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I was at Freedom Fest and I ran into Gary Johnson, and I had nothing in mind or anything. I just saw him and he was right there, and I said, "Are you really a libertarian?" And he lost it. He went nuts. He was this close to my nose, shouted. He was spitting all over me. I couldn't even understand what he was saying. He actually just lost it. He went insane. And then his bodyguards started moving in, and I just backed off. I said, "I was just asking if you're just a libertarian." And I've seen him numerous times just lose it. But anyway, it's not really about Gary Johnson. It's about the whole concept of should libertarians or anarchists even bother trying to be involved in the political system. And I think with what Adam Kokesh is trying to do in 2020, I think that's good. And I also think what's happening in Canada with Tim Moen, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, he's a narco-capitalist. He's been on Anarchast a few times. He's going to be speaking at Anarchapulco coming up. Almost everyone that I met in the Libertarian Party of Canada are narco-capitalists. And I don't see anything wrong with them getting in if they can. And they had no luck getting in last time. But if they did, if you see the House of Parliament and half the people in there are talking about Rothbard and the non-aggression principle and all that, I think that's an improvement because it gets people to see. But I don't think it's about necessarily getting into government necessarily. It's more like getting people to understand what's going on and that they are slaves and that we just want to free them.
Yeah, kind of like your campaign in Vancouver was about getting the information out. It wasn't, well, I'm going to get in and I'm going to change a system from within, just me, one politician, I'm just going to do all of this. I know that you knew that wasn't what the end.
I didn't even end up running.
Well, I know you
and
started.
I always said if I did win, which I never would win in Vancouver, people have been there. It's like, I spell Vancouver, I changed the C to a K. It's very communist. But if I did win, I don't think I'd even... I might actually go to the House of Parliament just to say a few things, but I definitely wouldn't stay there very long. I have no interest in anything to do with government or politics, but just to get it on the national stage, say a few things, get on TV. But yeah, that was the main intention, was just to try to get the message out there.
And the pragmatist position, I understand from on many levels. Like Tim Moen is an example of a great person that has done great work, and I commend Tim Moen for all the great work he does. People like John McAfee, I really enjoyed watching him run. And of course, once again, he wasn't talking about getting into office. He was talking about running this campaign to get a message out. And then
Just like Ron Paul, essentially.
Absolutely, and Adam Kokesh, that would be brilliant. I don't think that anyone's going to be completely successful changing the government from within. I think it's been tried for many, many years, and I don't think it's been very successful. However, I understand and I support their idea of getting into government and doing whatever they can to diminish the force of government. However, then there's people like Gary Johnson and Donald Trump, which, like, I'm going to be very forthright about this. Hillary Clinton is the worst human being, if you can even call her that I've ever seen run for office. And I'm talking worse than Nelson Rockefeller. I'm talking worse than these disgusting piles of trash. The only people I think are truly worse are the central bankers and the globalists are pulling Hillary Clinton strings, like the Rothschilds or Rockefellers, George Soros. But when it comes to actually running for office, I cannot imagine a worse person than Hillary Clinton. Now, with that said, and I mean also that she's raped and had people murdered and all that. But with that said, Donald Trump, I understand where this passion for Donald Trump is coming from. I understand where people are coming from. They see this guy. They see on the news them calling him a racist. I don't think he's a racist. I don't think there's evidence of that. He's a nationalist, and you can put that into another form of collectivism from racism. But I don't know if he's a racist. But he's also wrong on so many issues. On one day, he'll talk about how the Federal Reserve should push for negative interest rates or lower interest rates, or manipulate them and artificially lower them. And then on another day, he's talking about these, fake economies that the Federal Reserve is promoting, and we really need to take this beast down and all that. And he doesn't stay on the same wavelength on any given day. Now, he speaks out against globalism. Great. But he's not really anti-globalist when you actually look at his policies, when he's talking about, well, the TPP is terrible, however, we're going to strike a new deal with the TPP and a new deal with NAFTA and a new deal with NATO. No, that's still a form of globalism. We need to be sovereign, not isolationist, but sovereign, and then you deconstruct it down from there to the individual. But I think too many people have been pulled into this whole Donald Trump thing. The things that he says on TV any given day, you got to shake your head. It's like, dude, Hillary Clinton is saying these insane things, doing these insane things, getting found guilty of all this absolute insanity. And then every time that happens, he has to go out there and say something so stupid that just keeps it even, keeps the polls even. And then at the same time, it's bringing this new, ear to what they call the alt-right, but it's a mixture of libertarianism, real actual nationalist racists. Those are involved. I know that. I've seen Christopher Cantwell. But then there's also, a lot more individualists in there. And she's speaking out against InfoWars and Breitbart and all these groups that might not be pushing for absolute individualism, but they're definitely talking about shrinking down from globalism to nationalism, which is a start. And she's talking about shutting them down. And she's saying that they're all racist, and she's playing this card that, like, Hillary Clinton is the biggest conspiracy theorist I know of. She talks about how everything is the Russians. Every conspiracy was thought of through the Russian government, and now Donald Trump is speaking with Larry King on Russia Today, so he is speaking with the Russia Propaganda Network, so now he's working with Russia, and it's like, Hillary, where's your tinfoil hat? You need to put it on. You're getting your EMF waves messed with here. But, I just think this whole thing's a sham, and I could go on a rant for a long time because it comes from so many angles. We're just being divided, conquered, pushed into debt enslavement, confused, deceived. We're put in every way possible. Our health is diminished through these foods, through the food and the water. They are over-regulating the markets until they've completely destroyed any competition, and then they have these big corporatist monopolies that then, luckily for these corporatists, the public, the vast public, blames it on capitalism and the free market. This is exactly what the government wants. This is exactly what the globalists want. This is exactly what the central bankers want. Divide, conquer, debt enslavement, and being unable to take care of ourselves. So we depend on the state for absolutely everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I pointed out, the one way that we can have some hope is to get information out there to the people and let them hear the actual real information, the truth about how everything works. And that's one of the things you do at Alternative Media. Why don't you just mention a little bit about what you've been doing there and give any plugs about what you're doing, where people can find out more information, what you're doing?
Well, a couple years ago, I started WAM in 2013, and it was started as Winnipeg Alternative Media. Bad choice in names. I moved to World Alternative Media almost a year ago to the day, and about a year ago, I bumped into this guy, this Norwegian guy, at Monsanto March of all things that I was helping host. Because I'm not for the government banning GMOs or anything of that. I just want people to be able to learn the information and do with that what they need to do in order to create the demand in the market to move away from it. Now, anyways, I bump into this guy there, and I'm thinking the whole time, oh man, I'm going to be bumping into socialists and communists at this stupid event. And then this Norwegian guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Josh, you like free markets?" And I said, "Yes, I like free markets. How about you?" "Yes, I'm from Norway. I'm publishing a book." And I'm like, "Oh, awesome." And after the march was finished, we talked a bit. Turns out he has a currency album of like just dozens and dozens of failed fiat currencies over time that hyperinflated. He's got just this vast knowledge. He's on Freedom Force International with G. Edward Griffin. He's publishing this book on free markets. It was a brilliant thing. I got his book right here. I'll show it to the camera. The End of Freedom: How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us. So he joins us, and it was just the most incredible thing, Jeff. He started bringing this new volume of economic research to the table that I wasn't able to match up to. I've been studying free market economics since about 2009, but I've never been able to really bring it down to the exact details that this man has been able to. So John Sneisen came in, and he's been doing so many economics reports with us. He's brilliant. Then we have John Dowell, who's two Johns here at WAM, that is also a brilliant guy and has brought in a lot of liberty-minded perspective to WAM. And we've just been growing and growing, and we're interviewing people across the world, something that 10 years ago would have cost about $1 million just to be able to run this operation. But now you turn on Skype, you hook up a microphone and a camera, and away you go. So we've been interviewing, so many huge names over the years. I've confronted the Prime Minister of Canada, the Finance Minister, Conrad Black, Bilderberg Steering Committee member, David Frum, Bush's speechwriter, who was also invited by Conrad Black 4 times to the Bilderberg meetings. I've confronted the Defense Minister on funding and arming ISIS. The Premier of Manitoba, he probably came about this close to getting a restraining order against me because I was chasing him around to the point where I was basically causing him to have to leave events where he was like whining and dining people. The Minister of Child and Family Services. And I go from the local to the provincial to the national to the international to the global scale, just trying to cover all news from around the world because, let's face it, the local level is a very important thing to focus on because that's where people are best served as individuals, where you can actually get down to, voluntary community gardens, stuff like that. But when you really want to make a difference, you can't just focus on the locale. You can't just focus on the nation. You have to focus on the world because this whole agenda is unfolding at a global scale, and it all plays into everything at a national and a local level. So what I've been trying to do is try and mix up, talking about liberty, civil liberties, collectivism, and individualism, voluntarism, also confronting public figures and, terrible, nefarious individuals that are trying to enslave the public, and also talk about these economic situations that I know you do at the Dollar Vigilante, where we just talk about things like Suriname, which is being left in the dark largely because it's such a small country, and then of course compare it with Venezuela, Zimbabwe, which is implementing a U.S. currency as their backing. Just insane stuff like that. We're talking about Greece, Canada, even provincial economics, and we're just trying to spread the information as much as we can to try and stop the globalist order from forming around us. So we just want to end collectivism of all flavors. If that means deconstructing it from the top down, so be it. But the end goal is to destroy these coward globalists that want nothing more to plunder life and limb and destroy us as individuals and use us as pawns to sacrifice for the king and the queen. This is a long-lived order that's existed for a very, very, very long time that, they're doing the same thing that Hitler did. Everyone hates Hitler, right? Well, but why don't they hate other people doing exactly what Hitler did? Do they not have that name, that name that slips off the tongue? Let's say it as it is. These people are Nazis. These globalists are Nazis that want to central plan us into oblivion, divide and conquer, make us unhealthy, depopulate, and kill us because we are nothing to them. We don't matter to them. They don't give a damn about us. They just want to herd us together like animals on the farm and collectively coerce us into oblivion. They want to run us off that cliff. So what we at World Alternative Media are doing, we're trying to crush that. We're trying to get above that. Tell the people so that the people can go tell more people, and it spreads like a web, like the Freemasons say, weaving spiders, come not here. Well, we're the weaving spiders. We are weaving our webs throughout the planet. It's going to continue to spread, and the more these globalist scumbags try to stop us, the more we will prevail. Liberty will prevail. These globalists are going down.
I hope so. And with people like you, young people with a lot of energy, doing these things, if we have many, many, many more like you, it can happen. So we got to get this information out there. So why don't you let people know where people can find out more on World Alternative Media, your website, YouTube channel. I know you're even on Steam It now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Steam It. I'm trying so hard because this might just be the future of blockchain, the future of social media. And I'm really excited about Steam It. So I'm on there at Josh Sigurdson. I'm on Facebook at World Alternative Media and on YouTube at World Alternative Media. We got worldalternativemedia.com, which we are working very hard on actually getting up to shape because we have a whole host of technological problems. We're on Twitter at World Alt Media, and we are just trying to get that message across that you should be able to do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody, except for in defense. So as G. Edward Griffin puts it, I'm going to finish it off with this. The only justification for coercion is in the defense of life, liberty, and property. And I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I had G. Edward Griffin on Anarchast before, and I know you're working with him on a few things, and I know you're trying to get him down to Anarchapulco. He's got a few health issues, so we're going to see if that's going to happen or not, but I appreciate you doing that. G. Edward Griffin is an amazing anarcho-capitalist, amazing man who's done a lot of great things. He actually got me into understanding how central banking works, and I haven't stopped since, now doing the Dollar Vigilante. So check out all Josh's stuff. We'll have all the links down below.
And just look at the tides here. I just want to throw this in quickly. Look at the tides that this causes. You just mentioned G. Edward Griffin influenced you. You've influenced me and many other people. G. Edward Griffin influenced Ron Paul. Ron Paul has influenced so many people. This will just keep spreading as long as we put that out. Don't be down on ourselves. We are making a difference, even if we don't see it initially. In 50 years down the road, we will see it.
Yeah, I don't think it's even going to be 50. I can see it happening really fast now. 10 years ago, I didn't see much hope at all. It's exponentially growing, all these ideas now. And so just get them out there. And that's why it's so important to like, subscribe, share to this video. Check out Josh's stuff. Like it. Just even if you're not even wanting to watch it, it's something not of interest to you, just hit like because that'll get it out to more people. We just need to get this information out. Go to Steam It and upload his post. He'll get a bit of money. And it comes from nobody. It's actually from a great cryptocurrency and innovative innovative technology, which is all created by anarcho-capitalists. So we're all out there doing this stuff, and all we need is more support. And you don't have to get out there with a gun and go and blow up places. We don't have to do that anymore. Yeah, actually, please do. Yeah, it's not going to help anything. The way we'll do it is through changing minds. And as George Bush put it when he did his terrorist attack on Iraq, we got to change people's hearts and minds. Well, he had it kind of wrong. The way you do it is by getting this good information out there, good moral information about how we can have a much better world. So just, as I mentioned, just anytime you see any anarcho-capitalist, any liberty sort of stuff that you like, even if you don't like it that much, just hit like, just hit share. It'll get it out there to way more people, and that's how we change the world. And Josh said that's how it happens. And I've actually seen that happen in my lifetime numerous times, how one person has affected another, and then you see all these 50 other people doing stuff, and they were all affected by that one person. So you don't necessarily have to be that one person who does something that changes people, but just by sharing this information, that is a big part of it, because it gets in front of more people. So like I said, please like, subscribe, share. Just hit like. It's really easy. That's all you got to do. We can change the world so easily. If everyone just hits like, that's all you got to do. It's not that hard, and we can have a much better world. So I'd like to thank Josh for coming on, and that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.